Hello and welcome back to my Roman noble families ranking. It's a two-part series in which I'm listing different clans, or gentes, as they're called in Latin, in order of their political influence in the Roman Republic. The rules are simple. Each family gets points based on the number of political offices that all of its members have held. In part 1, we went through the spots from 16 to 6. We have now reached the big ones, the gentes maiores. These 5 outrank all others for good reason. They all have multiple members with a sizable contribution to Roman history. The names of these families are synonymous with the ascendance of Rome, its glory and republican legacy. So without further ado, let's see who they are. Number 5 is gens Aemilia. Despite placing only 5th in terms of prestige, Aemilii have a claim to being the most ancient of all the gentes on the list. They could trace their lineage to the second king of Rome, Numa Pompilius. What they also have going for them is an impressive resume of military achievements. Lucius Aemilius Barbula conquered Tarentum. Lucius Aemilius Paulus the Elder triumphed over Illyrians, but perished at Cannae, to be later avenged by his distant relative. In 190 BC, Lucius Aemilius Regulus handed Hannibal a defeat in the only naval battle that the legendary Carthaginian ever fought. But these victories pale in comparison to the triumph of Lucius Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus. His victory over King Perseus at Pydna ended the long-reigning Antigonid dynasty and placed Macedonia under Roman dominance. But the story of Aemilii Pauli is also a tragic one. 2 elder sons of the triumphant Macedonicus were adopted into other families. One became Cornelius Scipio, and another became Fabius Maximus. The victorious general relied on his younger sons to continue the family line, but both of them unexpectedly died young. Thus, the most illustrious branch of the Aemilii was extinguished in its prime. In the late Republic, the most famous Aemilius was Marcus Aemilius Lepidus. Although he was the least impressive triumvir, his inclusion into the highest institution of government demonstrates that gens Aemilia retained some of its influence until the end of the Republic. Suetonius in his De Vita Caesarum writes the following about the Claudii. That house, during the course of centuries, produced several very eminent, few great men. Hardly a single noble-minded one. In all ages it distinguished itself alike by a spirit of haughty defiance, by a disdain for the laws, an iron hardness of heart. Suetonius may have been biased towards Tiberius, but this characterization sounds entirely accurate. One can simply remember the story of Publius Claudius Pulcher to get an example of family's extreme haughtiness. When the sacred chickens refused to eat and thus provide auspicious auguries for the battle, Claudius Pulcher threw them off the board and committed to battle anyway. Proving that Roman gods do not tolerate disregard for sacred chickens, he suffered a disastrous defeat. Claudii did have their share of military victories, Battle of Metaurus for one, but that's not what they were famous for. Early Claudii earned the reputation of utter disdain for the lower classes. One of them, Appius Claudius Crassus, even caused the secession of the plebs almost single-handedly. But haughtiness and the disdain for the plebs are not the totality of Claudian legacy. The most famous of the Republican era Claudii was Appius Claudius Caecus. He is the man who elevated the office of censor to a new level of prestige. True to his name as Claudius, he achieved it by flaunting the rules and disregarding the law. But men of his caliber often get to do that and still leave the reputation of greatness. He initiated the building of the first Roman road and the first Roman aqueduct, and despite his family's reputation, introduced pro-plebeian legislature. Claudius Caecus left a big mark on the history of Roman civilization. He even reformed the Latin language and is cited as the author of the first Roman book of literary character. When he was already a blind man in his 80s, he was still active in Roman politics. On one such occasion he made a speech convincing the Senate to keep fighting the war against Pyrrhus, when some were already contemplating accepting defeat. He was a perfect embodiment of Roman republican vigor, obstinance, and vision of grandeur. Claudii of the Republican period are sometimes overshadowed by their descendants in the imperial era, but their contribution to Roman history is profound and hard to overestimate. longtime political opponents of the Claudii, gens Fabia, managed to squeeze past their rivals in no small part thanks to the help of another family. They have to thank gens Aemilia for the survival of their most illustrious branch. The adoption of the son of Aemilius Paulus Macedonicus into Fabii Maximi saved the prominent line from extinction. But it wasn't the first time that Fabii had a brush with the prospect of destruction. In a story so reminiscent of the Thermopylae, one has to wonder if it's been embellished. 306 members of gens Fabia fought against the Etruscans to the last man. The legend states that the family survived only because of a single boy, who was too young to join the fighting force. Regardless of how true this story is, it tells us a lot about the mindset of the gens. Fabii took the defense of Rome's northern frontiers as their familial duty. They valued bravery and military valor first and foremost. The era of their dominance began around the middle of the 4th century. They were probably the most instrumental family for the Roman recovery after the Gallic sack. Numerous consulships, dictatorships, and triumphs marked their participation in the conquest of Italy. The Fabian century, from the Great Samnite to the Second Punic War, saw the gens achieving an unprecedented feat of political influence. 3 consecutive generations of Fabii Maximi bore the title of Princeps Senatus, the most respected member of the Senate. This line started with Fabius Rullianus, continued with Fabius Gurges, and culminated with Fabius Verrucosus. Quintus Fabius Maximus Verrucosus also secured the longest-lasting legacy of the Fabii. The Fabian tactic, which he used against Hannibal in the Second Punic War, was adopted by numerous generals throughout history. It helped Washington to defeat the British, and became the undoing of Napoleon's Grande Armée in Russia. The civil wars of the late Republic saw Fabii mostly in supporting roles, but they were favored by Caesar Augustus, and maintained some relevance during the imperial times. They were one of the last gentes to disappear from historical record. The second place belongs to gens Valeria. This ancient family traces its lineage from the incorporation of the Sabines. They started to earn consulships earlier than any other family on the list. Publius Valerius Poplicola became the consul in the first year of the Republic. In his 4 consulships, Poplicola championed the rights of the plebs, celebrated the first Republican triumph, and invited the Claudii into Rome. He and his 2 brothers, Marcus and Manius, were the progenitors of the 3 ancient branches of Valerii. Poplicola may be a strong contender for the title of the most famous Valerius, but I decided to give this title to his descendant, Marcus Valerius Corvus. His career is that of a quintessential Roman hero. Heroic exploits at a young age earned him the public's admiration and a catchy nickname. Corvus became consul at 22 years old and celebrated his first triumph at 26. Throughout his long career, he received 5 more consulships, celebrated triumph no less than 5 times, and was twice a dictator. In politics, he favored the plebeian cause, just like his legendary ancestor. For his countless victories and a long service to the Republic, his statue was added to the pantheon of Roman heroes in the Forum of Augustus. But gens Valeria did not only produce generals and politicians. It also gave Rome some of her most famous poets, historians, and architects. Among those was the historian Valerius Antius, whose works are partially responsible for the family's stellar reputation. No fewer than 6 poets were born to different branches of gens Valeria, among them Gaius Valerius Catullus. If this ranking was based on familial contribution to Roman arts, Valerii would be at number 1. Gens Valeria maintained relevance in the political, social, and artistic life of Rome long into the imperial age. They outrank every other noble Roman family by virtue of their antiquity and consistent excellence. That is all but one. Gens Cornelia is in a tier of its own. Their total score is higher than the 3rd and 4th places combined. They scored more than any other gens in every category, except for plebeian tribunates. And by more, I don't mean a little bit more. I mean twice as many. The sheer numbers on display are staggering. And it's not like they had to rely on a small group of few extremely prominent men. The 107 consulships of gens Cornelia are distributed relatively evenly across 75 different individuals. Cornelia started off quite modestly, around a dozen consulships during the 5th century, but nowhere close to the prominence of Valerii or Postumi. Yet slowly but surely, the influence of the gens grew, new branches formed, and each of them produced more ambitious men with every generation. From Cornelii Malogunensis and Cornelii Cossi of the early Republic, the extended family tree of gens Cornelia spread wide, encompassing all imaginable echelons of Roman power. Sheer fecundity of the Cornelii came especially handy during the conflict with Carthage, when after the early disasters of the Second Punic War, the Republic was experiencing a shortage of men for military and administrative offices. This was the height of prominence of Cornelius Scipiones, whose name is synonymous with triumph over Rome's Punic rivals. But the rest of Cornelian stirpes were not far behind. By the 1st century BC, there were no fewer than 4 different extremely influential branches of Cornelii: Cornelii Lentuli, Cornelii Dolabelle, Cornelii Ruffini, and the aforementioned Scipiones, all vied for the highest positions in Roman society. Here's a fact to illustrate the influence of gens Cornelia. During Rome's first civil war, both sides were led by members of the Cornelii. Both Lucius Sulla and Lucius Cinna bore the nomen Cornelius. The victor of this war, Sulla, is as good a contender for the title of the most famous family member as any gens could wish for. The man who destroyed King Mithridates, elevated exceptional men like Pompey and Crassus, received the first ever dictatorship for life, yet retired after reforming the constitution and restoring the order to the Republic. But he has the misfortune of belonging to the same gens as the hero of the Second Punic War. Publius Cornelius Scipio Africanus presented a figure of a stature not seen since the days of Camillus. Driven in no small part by a desire to avenge his father and uncle, Publius Scipio achieved legendary feats of military tactics and strategy. His savvy diplomacy and genius on the battlefield were the instruments of Punic demise and Rome's ascendance. The Second Punic War was a pivotal moment in the history of Rome, and it is fitting that the architects of Roman victory represent 2 out of 3 most influential families of the Republic. I hope you found this video interesting. If you have questions about the ranking or an alternative opinion on the choices for the most prominent members, feel free to share them in the comments. Thanks a lot for watching until the end, and I will see you in the next one.